Hello, MBAP 516 online MBA students. This is Professor Jaros with a video explanation for how I graded exam number 1. So let's take a look at the questions. Number 1, why is emotional intelligence, EI, important to good leadership? Which component of EI is most crucial? Explain. Well, in the author's research, emotional intelligence was found to be twice as important as technical skills and cognitive intelligence in determining whether a leader was effective or not. I mean, that's the answer to the question. The author of the study, the author of the paper, Goldman, conducted a study in which he tested whether cognitive intelligence, technical skills, or emotional intelligence was most closely associated with effective leadership. And what he found was that emotional intelligence was twice as important in predicting leader performance as was either of the other two factors. In fact, it rose in importance as we went up the corporate ladder, meaning it was even more important for high-level managers than it was for lower-level managers. Of the 5 components of emotional intelligence, the most important is social skill, because social skill represents skills related to interacting with other people, and leadership is fundamentally about interacting with other people. So if you don't have good social skills, you're not able to put the other aspects of emotional intelligence, such as self-awareness and motivation and the others, to work. Social skill is the conduit by which the leader can implement their emotional intelligence in leadership situations. Question number 2. What are the 3 factors that allow a leader to influence his or her subordinates? What 3 organizational characteristics make leadership more difficult for a manager? Explain. Well, this comes from the article by Lorsch that I had you to read. And according to Lorsch, there are 3 sources of influence for a leader that allow them to influence their subordinates. Their position power, which is the amount of authority that they have been accorded by the organization, the power of the office that one holds, so to speak. The leader's charisma, which is a characteristic of the leader's personality, their personal magnetism, which allows them to sway their subordinates' behavior. And then last but not least, perceived competence. Subordinates are more likely to follow leaders that they believe know what they're doing. So it's a function of how much expertise the leader has. As far as the second part of the 3 organizational characteristics that make leadership more difficult for a manager, the first one is organizational complexity, which is basically a function of how large the organization is. The more employees an organization has, the more complex it is. Also, the number of levels that an organization has. The number of managerial levels, the more such levels, the more complex the organization is. Basically, the more complex an organization is, the more difficult it is to manage. Also, international geographic dispersion. Basically, what Lorsch argues is that global firms are more difficult to manage than domestic firms, because if a firm is global, then you're dealing with offices and facilities in many different countries. You have to follow the rules and regulations of many different countries and things of that nature. And then last but not least, the nature of organizational tasks. Some organizations have tasks for their employees to perform that are quite simple and basic. Oftentimes, those subordinates are performing complex tasks, particularly if subordinates are operating like in a high technology environment. It's more difficult to manage subordinates who are doing complex tasks than it is to manage subordinates who are doing basic tasks. All right, let's look at question number 3. According to research, what 3 categories describe managerial work? Give an example of each kind. Well, this is from the Mintzberg article, and Mintzberg talked about 3 different kinds of roles that managers play. Informational roles, decisional roles, and interpersonal roles. Interpersonal roles are roles that focus on relationships with other people at work. Interpersonal meaning, interacting with other people. And there are 3 kinds of interpersonal roles. You didn't have to describe all of them to me, but just one of them. The figurehead role, the leader role, and the liaison role. For example, the leader role, of course, is the role that involves motivating and directing the activities of subordinates in the organization. Informational roles are roles that involve managing and manipulating the flow of data and information in the organization. Examples are the monitor role, the disseminator role, or the spokesperson role. The spokesperson role is a role in which the leader represents the organization to external stakeholders, but you could have also told me about the disseminator or monitor role. And then lastly, decisional roles are roles that managers play that involve making decisions and taking actions within the organization. And examples are the entrepreneur, disturbance handler, resource allocator, and negotiator role. With the negotiator role, for example, the manager represents the organization in a bargaining situation with representatives of other organizations. But again, you could have picked any of those 4 roles and described them. The main thing was I wanted you to identify the 3 categories, which were interpersonal, informational, and decisional. Tell me what they involve, and then give me an example of each one, as I just described. Last but not least, according to Hertzberg, is offering an employee higher wages or benefits an effective way to motivate them to sustain high performance? Why or why not? Also, what should an organization do to create consistently highly motivated employees? Well, the answer is, to the first part of the question, no, it's not effective. According to Hertzberg, wages and benefits are what he called hygiene factors, meaning that they reduce dissatisfaction among employees, but they do not motivate them to perform at a high level. Basically, if employees don't feel they're being paid well, they will be dissatisfied, which will harm their performance. But paying them fairly and providing them with good benefits merely brings them to a point of neutral satisfaction. It doesn't motivate them to high performance because it doesn't achieve sustained involvement with the organization. And also, employees tend to take it for granted. That is, raises become a one-way ratchet that costs the organization more money. You offer an employee a raise, you can motivate them for the short term, but they then come to take that raise for granted, according to Hertzberg. And so if you want to motivate them the next time around, you have to offer them even more money and even higher benefits. And then that becomes very, very costly for the organization. And it's not economically sustainable in most cases. That's the reason why it does not motivate employees to high performance. And this is important. Some of you mentioned that high pay and benefits was a hygiene factor, but you didn't explain why it doesn't sustain high levels of performance. And that was an important part of the question as well. Finally, what should an organization do to create consistently highly motivated employees? Well, according to Hertzberg, you have to leverage what he calls the motivation factors. And basically, that means using job enrichment. Hertzberg argues that organizations should implement job enrichment, which involves building responsibility, autonomy, opportunity advancement, and growth and learning into a job. It's those four factors which speak to the employee's higher order needs and that create satisfying work that will be truly motivating for them in the long run. All right, I hope this explanation of Exam 1 was beneficial to you. Good luck in the next assignments and on Exam 2.